Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about the drone attacks that are continuing to take place against Russian oil refineries. The first round of drone attacks took place on the 15th of March, and this news was published all over mainstream media. And for around 7 days, we saw lots of reports of these attacks taking place. However, over the last 6 weeks or so, there have been very few instances of these attacks being reported, and so that might lead you to conclude that the drone attacks have actually stopped. However, they've been continuing on a daily basis. It's just that mainstream media moves on to the next big thing, such as Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump, which is far more entertaining for the vast majority of people. So in today's video, I want to give you an update as to what's been happening with those drone attacks, and specifically to talk about the fact that Ukraine is now achieving longer ranges in terms of these successful strikes, which is obviously causing concern from Russia's point of view. And one of those concerns that's rising right now is what's happening with the refinery staff, because it's been reported that since the first attack took place in the middle of March, there has been a mass exodus of people working in those refineries who are now very concerned about being on site if there is a successful strike, because this could obviously lead to a massive explosion if the drone strikes in the right place. And the people who are leaving those jobs are the highly skilled technicians that Russia needs to keep those refineries operating. And it's been losing staff like that ever since the invasion of Ukraine started. So I'll go through some of the details as to what's happening with the staff. We'll also have a look at which refineries have been damaged so far and what the impact of this is on Russia's output, because the output levels are now falling significantly. We'll then talk about what the impact of all of this is on the overall export of oil and oil products from Russia's point of view, because that's starting to be affected. And then finally today, I'll round up with my summary as to what I think is likely to happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months with regards to the ongoing drone attacks and what the impact of this will be on the Russian economy. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. Genuinely mean this. If you've sent me a YouTube super thanks or bought me a coffee over the course of the last week or so, thank you so much for the time and effort you've taken to do that. I know it's a load of hassle. I really appreciate it. And if you're a long-term supporter of the channel, which is absolutely fantastic from my point of view, if you've signed up either through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee membership or YouTube membership, thank you for that ongoing support. It really does help to keep me motivated, keeps me thinking up new ideas for videos and posting on a regular basis. So thank you. Following the first round of Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil refineries, oil prices all around the world jumped in price as a result of the fact that markets were concerned that damage to the Russian refineries would cause a reduction in the supply of global oil and therefore force up prices. And actually on the 22nd of March, the Financial Times reported that the USA had contacted Ukraine and asked them to stop targeting Russian oil refineries, firstly because they were concerned about global oil supplies, and secondly they were concerned that Russia would increase its retaliation. Now Ukraine ignored that advice, and they have been launching drone attacks against Russian oil refineries on a daily basis ever since those. And we're talking about hundreds of drone attacks every single day. Now, as I discussed in previous videos, not all of these drone attacks are successful. A lot of them are shot down, but it's very difficult to be able to defend yourself when you don't really know where the next drone attack is coming from. And in order to emphasise that point, I thought it was worth having a look at 3 of the most recently reported successful drone attacks. On the 12th of May, it was reported that fires had broken out at the Russian oil refinery in Volgograd, which is around 300 miles to the eastern border of Ukraine, as a result of strikes by Ukrainian drones. And interestingly, this is the second time that Ukrainian drones have successfully struck the Volgograd refinery, that has a processing capacity of just under 15 million tonnes of oil per year. On the 10th of May, it was reported that fires had broken out at the Kaluga refinery, which is located around 350 miles north of Ukraine. And this refinery was actually the first refinery that was attacked on the 15th of March, and shows that Ukraine is really mixing things up by targeting refineries that have already been hit and that are still trying to repair the original damage. And on the 9th of May, it was reported that Ukrainian drones had successfully hit a refinery in Bashkiria, which is located over 1,000 miles to the northeast of Ukraine. And this strike represents the longest range drone strike that has successfully been deployed by Ukraine. And on the 1st of May, it was reported that Ukrainian drones had successfully hit one of Russia's largest oil refineries, run by Rosneft, the state-owned business, in Ryazan. And this facility was hit in the middle of March and is still trying to repair the damage from that original strike. And Ryazan's located around 400 miles north of the Ukrainian border. So what these attacks show is that Ukraine is continuing to launch drones on a daily basis, and that Russia is unable to defend against every single one of them. Russia has made a lot of statements recently that it's going to deploy air defense systems and bring people into the area, specifically looking to target Ukrainian drones. But as we've seen, they are continuing to get through, and they are now having success in hitting refineries that are located over 1,000 miles into Russian territory. And of course, from Russia's point of view, this is highly damaging, firstly in terms of the lost output, and secondly in terms of morale of the people working at those facilities. So let's have a look at what's been happening to output. This chart shows the daily output from Russian oil refineries dating back to February 2022, which was when the invasion of Ukraine started. And what this shows is that prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the oil refineries were producing 5.8 million barrels of oil per day. Immediately following the invasion, that figure dropped to 5 million as Russia experienced a sharp fall in demand for its refined products. However, as it started to find new customers, capacity was built back up again, and by July 2022, it was up to 5.6 million barrels per day. It dipped back down to 5.5 million in September 2022 as demand for oil globally started to soften. However, by December 2022, the output was up to 5.7 million, which was almost the level that the refineries had been operating at prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There was a sharp fall in output in May 23, following the introduction of the price cap against Russian refined products. However, by July 23, the capacity had been built back up to 5.6 million, as Russia managed to find customers who were happy to buy its refined products at a discount. The capacity fell back down to 5.3 million barrels per day in October 23, as the USA started to ramp up its sanctions against Russian oil. Now, interestingly, that reduction in capacity came at the same time that Russia announced a ban on the export of refined oil products, as it said that it needed to keep them for its home markets. Capacity was then increased back up to 5.5 million. However, if we look at what's happened over the last few months, there has been a noticeable decline. And in April 2024, the refinery output has fallen to 5.2 million, which is the lowest level that's been seen since the price caps were introduced. And this reduction in output is as a direct result of the Ukrainian drone attacks. And this table provides a current estimate of the impact of the existing damage that's been caused by Ukrainian drones on Russia's output and therefore the sale of its oil products. The most conservative of these estimates has been put forward by JP Morgan, who are estimating a reduction of 300,000 barrels per day. And when you think that those barrels will be selling for at least $100 per barrel, because refined products sell for more than crude oil, and crude oil is currently priced at somewhere between $85 and $90. So refined products will definitely be selling for $100, possibly as much as $120, $130. But if we keep it to 100 because it's simple to do the math, 300,000 barrels per day equates to $30 million per day that Russia is losing as a result of this reduction in capacity, and that equates to around $11 billion on an annualized basis. The International Energy Forum and Kepler are both estimating an impact of between 300,000 and 350,000 barrels per day. And if the impact is assumed to be 350,000 barrels per day, that would mean that Russia is losing $35 million of income every single day, which equates to almost $13 billion on an annualized basis. And the most aggressive of all of these estimates has been provided by Wood Mackenzie, who believe that Russia has lost capacity of 375,000 barrels per day, which equates to $37.5 million per day and around $14 billion of annualized income. And this, of course, is just the impact of the drone strikes that have happened so far. It doesn't take account of any additional strikes that may be happening over the rest of 2024. It's now been reported that Russian technicians and other specialist staff that work on site in Russian oil refineries have been handing in their notice and leaving in their droves because they're concerned about their welfare if these attacks continue. Now, when you're working at an oil refinery, obviously there are severe risks. If something is hit, if there's an explosion, it could cause catastrophic damage, and people simply don't want to take that risk. And this is a really interesting knock-on implication of the drone attacks. So far, we've just been looking at the direct economic impact of a strike, taking out some capacity and losing some sales value from Russia's point of view on a daily basis. But when you take a step back and think about what the wider implications are, we can start to see how this is really damaging in terms of the overall impact on Russia's economy. Because if you've got people who are now worried about going to work, and these people are living up to 1,000 miles away from the Ukrainian border, so I'm sure on a daily basis, prior to these attacks, those people weren't concerned about anything happening in terms of the war in Ukraine. They were carrying on their daily life as normal, as if nothing was happening. According to the Russian media, this is a special military operation that's taking place in a different country, so nothing to worry about from your perspective. However, when your place of work is suddenly attacked by a drone that's travelled over 1,000 miles to get there, and it causes a huge explosion and a fire, and your facility has to be closed down, obviously that brings everything home. You start thinking about what the potential risk is to you and your family, and therefore you decide that you may not want to go to work after that. And this is a real problem from Russia's point of view because, as we've discussed a number of times before, immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, there was a mass exodus of people. A lot of professional workers decided that they no longer wanted to work in Russia. They were going to find jobs overseas and basically emigrate. And what we're seeing now is a potential knock-on third wave of that, because there was a second wave after the mobilization was called when President Putin announced that they needed another 300,000 men to go and fight in Ukraine. That caused around another 700,000 people to decide that they wanted to leave Russia. But what we're seeing today is the potential long-term impact. If Russians are now concerned about their welfare at their place of work, they may decide that actually global oil is something that they can up sticks and work in somewhere else. You can go to a different country that isn't at war with Ukraine and therefore doesn't carry the risk of being killed in a drone attack while you're at your desk doing your job. This chart shows the daily revenue that Russia has been earning from the sale of refined oil products dating back to January 2022, which was the month before Russia invaded Ukraine. And the scale on the left-hand side of this chart is shown in millions of euros and goes from 0 at the bottom to 350 at the top. And the different colours on this chart represent the destination of those oil sales. The blue section at the bottom represents sales to Brazil. The red section above it, sales to China. The light brown section above that, sales to India. The grey section, other countries, predominantly European Union countries. The orange section is sales to Singapore. The green section, Turkey. And the purple section represents unknown sales. And what this shows is that in January 2022, the sale of refined oil products was running at around 230 million euros per day, which is roughly around $250 million. Immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as a result of the fact that oil prices increased significantly, the value of daily sales rose above 300 million euros. It stayed at or around that level for around 6 months. However, the reduction in the global demand for oil, as well as the impact of the sanctions, brought the daily sales back down to around 250 million euros. And as you can see, over the course of the last 18 months, there has been a gradual and continual reduction in the total value that Russia has been earning. And if we focus in and have a look at what's been happening in 2024, in January 24, daily sales were running at around 240 million euros. And if we look at the breakdown of that, you can see that the largest single section in January was Turkey, represented by the green section, followed by Brazil, Singapore, India, and a collection of other countries. And if you're sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, I thought China and India were buying tons of oil directly from Russia. This chart shows refined products. These are the products that have been through the refinery process, such as gasoline, diesel, kerosene. And as we've discussed in previous videos, China and India have their own refinery systems. So they prefer to buy crude oil from Russia and then put it through their own system because firstly, it adds value. So they're not paying a higher price for the finished products. They're paying a lower price for the crude product and then putting it through their own refinery system. It also creates jobs in their countries, so it helps with their economy. And thirdly, they are also then able to export it. And as we've discussed in previous videos, there actually have been instances where India and China are selling those refined products to countries that have sanctions against Russia because it's very difficult to be able to determine exactly where that crude oil came from. Once it's been through the refinery process, it's difficult to establish where the oil came out of the ground. If we now look at the latest data, the total revenue that Russia is earning has fallen to around 200 million euros per day, which is the lowest level that Russia has seen at any point in the last 2.5 years. So this shows that the sanctions are having an impact. And if we look at the latest breakdown, you can see that Turkey is still the biggest buyer. However, the percentage that it's buying has fallen. The green section on the far right-hand side of this chart is smaller than it was in January 2024. And this is partly as a result of the fact that Turkish companies are now concerned about secondary sanctions being applied against them. The USA have warned all companies that if they are found to be dealing with Russian businesses and trading above the price cap, that they will be hit by sanctions. So Turkey is very concerned about that. And interestingly, there's also been a reduction in the amount of refined products that are being purchased by Brazil, China and India. And the fastest growing section in this chart is the purple unknown section at the top. And potentially those products could relate to countries that are not in a position to be able to pay for the refined products, such as Cuba and Venezuela. And if Russia isn't actually being paid for those deliveries, it's just building up some sort of debt arrangement, then the total revenue that Russia is receiving would be around 175 million euros per day, which represents a reduction of around 50% against the peak period that Russia was seeing at the start of the war in Ukraine. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on with regards to the ongoing drone attacks by Ukraine on Russian oil refineries is really important, both in terms of the development of that war and the Russian economy. And as we've talked about in today's video, these attacks are continuing to take place on a daily basis. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that Ukraine is actually ramping up its drone capability. It's aiming to be able to produce 2 million drones over the course of 2024. And in addition to that, the European Union has committed to providing another 1 million drones. So in total, Ukraine could have 3 million drones over the next 12 months. And if even only a very small fraction of those successfully make it through the Russian defense systems, that has the potential to cause chaos at those facilities. And as we've seen in today's video, drones are continuing to successfully make it. They're hitting their targets and they're getting longer in range, over 1,000 miles. And what this is now causing is two things. Firstly, there is the direct impact of these strikes. And we've talked about that. There is a potential at the moment for around 350,000 barrels to have been lost from the output. So that's going to have an impact on the Russian economy. Around $12 billion will be taken out. But there's also the knock-on implication of that, because if you're working at that facility, you might not get paid if they have to close down the facility. And there's always a domino effect in terms of if you're not getting paid, that means you might not spend as much in your local economy. You don't go out, you don't go to the store, you might not go out to eat, and therefore all of those businesses are impacted. So there's a knock-on implication every time one of these facilities is hit and has to close down. But the more important factor that we've covered in today's video is that some of the technical staff who are working at those facilities full-time, that's their place of work, they've decided that the risk is now too high. They don't want to work in those facilities anymore, and they've left the company. And with a business like this, you have to go overseas if you don't want to work in Russia. And a lot of those people may decide that their life is better focused on going somewhere else, going to another country. It might be another Eastern European country that also has oil, so they don't have to emigrate to anywhere like the USA or Canada, where they may find it difficult to actually get a work permit at the moment if you're a Russian national. But what this tells us is that there are now further problems in terms of technical staff for the oil and gas industry. And as we know, over the last 2 years, there has already been a mass exodus. Firstly, we had the partnerships leaving Russia. So companies like ExxonMobil, BP and Shell all decided that they no longer wanted to work in Russia. So they took all of their staff, all of their technical know-how and all of their software and IT with them. And that's a major problem from Russia's point of view. We also had all the people who were working in those businesses who decided that they didn't want to be in Russia anymore. So there was a mass exodus. Around 1.2 million people are estimated to have left Russia over the last couple of years because they didn't agree with what was happening politically. But now what we're seeing is, as a result of potential personal risk, people not wanting to be killed at work by a drone that might come through the window whilst you're sitting at your desk. Those sort of risks are now impacting on everyday life in Russia. And as we saw from the graphs, these attacks are taking place all over the place. It's not just focused on one region or one refinery. Virtually every oil refinery in Russia is now a potential target and therefore is at risk. So if you work in any of those facilities, you might be reconsidering your options. And as we also discussed in a recent video, because of Russia's focus on becoming a wartime economy, a lot of businesses are now helping with the war effort. And that's actually increased demand for staff and increased wages. So you can actually get paid more now doing jobs that were previously deemed to be lower than the oil and gas industry. You're actually earning more. So there is a real risk here that the oil and gas industry could see a migration of people either leaving Russia or just deciding they don't want to work at an oil refinery. They'd rather be a delivery driver or a truck driver or something of that nature. And if Russia does continue to see that sort of movement, it's going to cause even further problems at a time when it needs as many technical staff as possible to keep all of these facilities open and running. So the overall summary of today's video is that the drone attacks are continuing to take place. They're not hitting mainstream media as regularly as they were a couple of months ago, but they're still happening. They're still getting through the Russian defences. They're causing major problems when those strikes hit those refineries. They're causing them to actually reduce the amount of oil that they can process, which is impacting on the revenue and therefore impacting on the Russian economy. But also, in addition to the impact from the cash point of view, there's now an impact in terms of staff. People are leaving the industry. They don't want to work at those facilities. And that has the potential to cause even further problems for Russia if it doesn't have enough people in the right jobs. And that will have a further knock-on impact to both the cash flow and the Russian economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. You found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And here's something to put a smile on your face.